Game over. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for July 28th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for what should hopefully be some interesting counter-programming, because there's been a lot of Marvel talk this week, some Deadpool and Wolverine talk.
Yeah, it's getting a little exhausting.
We're gonna take a hard right turn from that.
Yeah,
and
little indies rule. Little small films. Let's find some levity in all of this.
On our scooter, a hard right turn on our scooter, especially.
Yeah, not a car driving over a cliff. There's no Louise here. It's just Thelma.
Exactly.
It's just Thelma.
Exactly. I will say I am typically non-confrontational. I
Same.
try to be a nice person. I don't really yell or get into arguments or fights anymore. I don't really have the energy for it. Even when I play hockey, which is, fundamentally a physical
It's a
contact sport, I try to go, I go out of my way to not hit people, not to trip people or slash people. Like, I don't play that style. Like, I try to be nice to everybody. I lay that out to say this. If anyone has seen Thelma and they don't like it, I'm fighting you. I'm sorry. I'm dropping the gloves. I'm going to fight somebody.
It's great while it lasted. I guess I'll put in my retirement notice right now.
I don't understand how anyone can see this film and have any sort of cynical response to it. And maybe this is my, counter to all of the cynical energy we see on social media all the time, whether it be with politics, but especially with film. It's so hard to just linger in something so pure and wonderful and delightful. I will say most of everything I've seen around this film has been that. It's just been this general, warm blanket that is just comforting, and you don't ever want to take it off.
Well, there are some people out there who are not warm, who are not compassionate, who are not welcoming, who may or may not also work in the film critic space. There are different perspectives out there, and maybe they'll be the ones who see this movie with a more cynical lens and think, well, that's just cutesy, fartsy nothingness. and
I'll fight those people.
Okay, well, then maybe that's where you'll get the energy for it. Spoiler alert, when I jokingly said I'm putting in my retirement, no, I'm not putting in my retirement. This movie's adorable.
Exactly. So we're going to talk about Thelma. I also want to get this off my chest before we get into the review, Brendan, because I don't want to get bogged down in this as we're talking about the film.
Yeah. Fred
Heckinger, who plays Danny here, I don't believe that's his name. I don't believe Fred Heckinger is his name. You know who I think that is? I think that person is a time traveler. I think it's a time traveler.
Okay.
I think that person is Joaquin Phoenix from the past that has come to the future. That's who it is. Because the whole time I'm like, that is a young Joaquin Phoenix, and you can't tell me otherwise. Like, the mannerisms, the way he talks, everything about him was like, that's Joaquin. Like, he's giving a Joaquin Phoenix impersonation in this movie.
I'm not sure if I saw that. I'm thinking about it now. I'm not sure if I saw that. I could see some similar mannerisms, but I think he has such a different face that it's hard for me to, find the comparison.
It's close enough for me. It's pretty close. I don't know. I'm looking at him now. I think it's pretty close, especially in that film. Like the way he looks in that film, but it like more than
the facial hair helps.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But it's the mannerisms and the way he talks. It is so Joaquin Phoenix like. I admittedly had to pause the film several times just to get it out of my system because I was so distracted by it. Like that's how
You-
taken aback I was.
Maybe the thing with me is that when I see Fred Heckinger, or is it Heschinger? I'm not sure if we're pronouncing his name right, so we'll give a few pronunciations there. When I see him, I still see his performances in properties like The White Lotus, or remember the movie The Woman in the Window with Amy Adams, where he secretly plays the bad guy? Spoiler alert for that movie if you ever plan on watching it. He has such a young, boyish kind of approach that I still see a little kid even when he's not playing a little kid, and maybe that's the disconnect as to why I don't fully see Joaquin Phoenix like you do. I still see such a little kid here, and he plays that really well. He's got a boyish kind of charm to him and an innocence to him, and that's certainly appropriate to counteract the elderliness of June Squibb in this movie. So it makes the pairing very appropriate. But I think that's maybe why I'm not fully seeing the Joaquin Phoenix yet, because I have such a very specific, I guess, reference point with how I see this guy.
Yeah. I will say I have seen The Woman in the Window. Don't remember anything about that film. And I have not seen The White Lotus. So
good show. It's
as
a good show.
far as I am concerned, I don't have anything to really ground him as an actor. I guess he was in Vox Lux, which I've also seen. But again, I don't really remember him or anything about him in that film. Same thing with Eighth Grade. But maybe that goes back to your point about how young he is in those movies.
He's
Alex
very young.
Strangelove, that's another one I've seen.
Yeah, and by that point, he was born in 99. So in those movies, he was still pretty darn close to high school age. And he's playing a 20-some-year-old in this one. I think they may have said he might be 24, which is basically how old he is in real life. So I could see the resemblance there. But yeah, in those past properties, he was a child. He was, and he still kind of has some of those childlike tendencies, which I think are appropriate for this movie for sure.
Yeah, so it certainly could be that. Like like he's not an actor that has stood out to me beyond maybe how endearing he might have been in those previous movies. I don't really know. I'd have to go back and revisit those films and look at him specifically.
I love how we're spending so much time on Fred Heckinger when we really should be talking about June Squibb here.
I know. We'll get to that. That's why I wanted to get this out now, because I did not want to get into this rabbit hole later on when we're actually talking about the film and June Squibb.
He's good in this movie. We can end it there then, I guess.
Well, I can't end it there. That it was such a fun thing for me in this film.
Fair.
It was part of its charm. Like, I'm not bringing this out as a criticism to the film or his performance or anything, but there is something about the facial hair, the squaggly hair that he has. Like, he's just unkept in this film, and there's something about it, coupled with, again, the way he talks and those mannerisms that are so, like, it felt like he was giving a Joaquin Phoenix impersonation. Yeah. And I had to pause the film on several occasions because I was distracted and laughing at what I was watching.
Wow. Okay. I didn't have that experience, but that's interesting.
And look, I love Joaquin Phoenix. He's one of my favorite actors working today. So it's not a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. There are worse actors you could try to impersonate.
He's one of my favorite people. He named his kid River.
I know, exactly. So look, I'm not saying it as a bad thing. It was one of those interesting, elements of the experience for me.
It is nonetheless pretty interesting when you find yourself so distracted by an actor because they remind you of yet another actor. That doesn't happen. And
you don't
very
expect
often.
it. Like you don't.
Yeah, that doesn't happen very often.
Exactly. Like every time he was on the screen, I was like, "This is a time traveler. This is a young Joaquin Phoenix. This is a time traveler."
Interesting. Okay. Okay.
At any rate, let's get into Thelma, which stars June Squibb, young Joaquin Phoenix, Richard Roundtree, Clark Gregg, Parker Posey, Malcolm McDowell, If you are not familiar with Thelma, I really hope that you do. It is about a 93-year-old woman, and you're not going to believe this, but her name is Thelma.
Had no idea.
She gets
Thought it was
duped
June.
by a phone scammer pretending to be her grandson. She sets out on a treacherous quest across the city to reclaim what was taken from her. So if you don't know, this is the sequel to The Beekeeper that came out.
No, it is actually pretty. It is pretty appropriate. You make a comparison like that because this movie is pretty referential in what type of movies it likes.
Exactly, and it would love The Beekeeper. This film loves The Beekeeper. Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, Brendan, what did you think about Thelma?
Well, it's interesting because apparently this is a pseudo true story. If I'm not mistaken, Thelma's apartment.
The initial
in this
setup
movie,
is true. Anyway,
the initial setup at least. But the apartment that Thelma lives at in this movie is apparently the apartment of the real life Thelma, who is still alive today at age 103. So that's that. It's a neat little time when you see things like that. That clearly the movie has not just a respect for the movies that it's referencing, but also its real life subject matter, and also has a respect for trying to depict that real life subject matter, which with as much grace and authenticity by casting someone who is in her 90s in real life.
Yeah.
June Squibb was born in 1929, and she's still giving performances like this.
Her first leading performance, which is crazy.
That's
crazy.
Cruel. That's mean.
Yeah.
That's just mean. It's absolutely mean. So how many Mission Impossible references can we make during this?
I don't know.
There's
plenty to be had.
I gave this my review on Letterboxd. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5, but I think I enjoyed it a little bit more than that rating might suggest. I just simply wrote in my blurb, Rogue Elders is basically what I wrote. But I feel like you can have even more fun with that. Maybe Elderly Reckoning. What else can you do? But I say that because Tom Cruise and Mission Impossible is kind of a plot point here. Like that is more or less the initial setup for Thelma herself to take action against this phone scam. And the movie it's very much a gimmick. Like it is taking this idea, what if Mission Impossible, but with old people? So it recreates a car chase. Oh, but it's on scooters. It does a little heist sequence. Oh, but it's just trying to get something off of someone's shelf in a bedroom. It's like it recreates the traditional tropes that you would see in maybe a spy action thriller like Mission Impossible, but with people who are maybe in their 80s or 90s.
And it shoots it with the same framing and
it's edited like an action film. This movie is labeled as an action comedy on IMDb, and I do think that's actually pretty appropriate. The musical score here, and forgive me, I don't have the composer's name in front of me. I'll have to look that up as we're talking.
Nick Chubba?
Nick Chubba. Okay. Clearly trying to capture the sounds of, let's say, that Mission Impossible theme, that classic theme. It's eerily similar to that. So the film is clearly going for a gimmick. It's wearing that gimmick on its sleeve. Your mileage may vary if you're maybe one of those cynical people we joked about earlier, JD, that might just find that a little bit tiring. But it's hard to find it tiring when June Squibb is just this much of a doll. She really is quite great here, giving a very effortless performance. It's one of those performances that doesn't even feel like it's an acting performance, which might seem to suggest she's more or less playing a version of herself, even though she is playing a real life person in some ways. But I love that effortlessness that just goes to show how committed she is to this craft, even at 93 years old. And I think that meta component weirdly makes the movie all the more charming for me. So I think it is one of the more charming films you're going to come across this year, especially if you're one that's willing to get on its gimmicky wavelength. And I certainly was. I think it's a very good film.
Yeah, this is the most delightful movie you'll watch this year, hands down. June Squibb is a national treasure. She is magnetic in this film. She is having the time of her life. I loved watching her on screen. She completely ate up every moment she was on it.
Yeah.
And you are right. I love how it is inspired by Mission Impossible of all movies. It's really
Right.
interesting how this is edited, cut, framed like an action movie. And it's interesting also when you couple with that with how it's this revenge fantasy of sorts,
Sure.
wanting to get your revenge on these people that had duped you out of $10,000, which is again where it's also like the Beekeeper in that regard. But
Yeah.
there's so much charm and wit to this film that you can't help but fall under its spell. And underneath the comedy of it, I think what's really great about this movie too is that it does have something to say, and it does it with wonderful sincerity. I mean, it's this movie about, yes, realizing what you have, the people in your life, how precious that time is.
Yeah.
But it's also this movie about the truths of getting older, the reality of it, the anxieties of being a burden on the ones you love as you age. This film directly addresses those things here. And I think, not many movies do that, at least not to this degree. There's a raw honesty to this film that I do appreciate. It's sense of identity loss with these characters, how things change even in a short time span when you get to that age, when you're in your 80s and 90s, and how things can quickly fizzle out for you as an individual. But even as your body, it might start to fail you, there is something about the human condition, the human spirit, how that maintains, that I think is really great. Like there's a line at the end of this film, and this is where it's not subtle at all, although I don't think the film is trying to be subtle.
It's not.
But
No,
there
it's
was
fine.
a
It's not.
line from Thelma where she says, they're on the scooter, and she says, look at those trees. Look at the bottom of those trees. Look at how gnarled they are, and yet they live. Which I think is one of the more poignant, again, not subtle, but poignant moments of the film.
Yeah.
Where, again, it wants to talk about how frail you might get, how mentally unstable things could get at times, but the human spirit very much remains, and that's why June Squibb's performance here is really great, because yes, she has, a body that is indicative of a 93-year-old. She's up there in age, but her spirit is that of a youthful 17-year-old. Like, she's having the time of her life. And I just absolutely adore that about this film. It is impossible. It is mission impossible to not love.
It is.
It's just so good.
Yeah. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to dislike this movie because you might fail.
You're gonna fail miserably. Yeah,
you're right. The film's messaging it's not subtle, but it's also nothing new. We've seen many movies tackle similar themes about what it means to get old. You can think of countless examples that are all in different genres. You can go back to the 90s with something like The Straight Story, the David Lynch film with Richard Farnsworth. You can go with something a bit more epic and romantic, like David Fincher's The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. You can go to Up. Disney Pixar's Up does some similar things
absolutely.
too. There's nothing revolutionary about Thelma, but for some reason, a lot of these movies still mostly work. At least they mostly work for me because they acknowledge that newness to these themes is kind of a moot point. There's a universality to what it means to reckon with your body starting to fail you, and that doesn't mean you still can't be awesome. It's a simple thing like that. This movie Thelma, it loves old people. This movie loves old people, and I love that about the film, and I love the pairing of it too. I mean, June Squibb is great here, but I love the pairing that she has with Richard Roundtree, who's kind of one of those character actors you see show up every now and then, but he is really terrific here, and I love the interplay that the two of them have, and reckoning with those themes even further, which is why maybe this should have been called Elderly Reckoning, to play with the Mission Impossible tropes a little bit further.
Yeah.
But I think their dynamic is quite great, and it really adds. It adds an emotionality that's well earned, given those themes that you were talking about. I think it's quite great.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, there isn't anything revolutionary about Thelma and its ideas. What I really like about this film, though, is how raw and honest its conversation is. There is some fun to be had for sure. It's a bit, there's some lunacy to the adventure.
Yeah.
At times it's a bit over the top, but underneath that humor and that charm is a film wanting to have a conversation about what it's like to get older, and
how you can still matter,
and how you can still matter. And there's a raw honesty, there's a raw truth to that here that I really do appreciate.
Yeah.
And you couple that with the idea of how this is inspired by Mission Impossible. You got to love the irony that we've talked about, and this film is certainly very aware of this, that Tom Cruise is going to do those movies. He's going to do his own stunts well into his 90s.
Yeah.
Because that's who he is. And I do love that at least they've admitted this on the press tour. I don't know if it's true, but they have talked about extensively how Squibb did her own stunts here, which I think is really great.
Well, honestly, that does add a weight to this movie, like a physical weight, because by comparison to other action movies, the stunt work here is nothing special. But for a 93-year-old woman, it's pretty good stuff.
Sure.
It's pretty good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not as if the film is asking her to do, Tom Cruise level stuff. She's not
but a
hanging
93
outside of a window or of an airplane.
But a 93-year-old woman tripping and falling is maybe the equivalent of breaking your ankle jumping across buildings. To that different age bracket.
Yeah, and I do love the juxtaposition between that moment, which is where the film has a sense of gravitas to it.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that moment in the bedroom when she's trying to steal the gun.
Oh, gosh.
And how she just kind of rolls over on the bed, but it's shot as if it's this amazing action sequence, or like something from like Ocean's 11.
Well, I was just gonna say, it reminded me most of the laser heist in Ocean's 12.
Yeah, it's so good.
So did the pawn shop heist, or like when she breaks into the pawn shop and she's working around these different it's such a tight room with it's so discombobulated, it's such a messy space, and she's trying to make as little noise as possible, and it's like it's kind of Ocean's like.
It is very Soderbergh-esque. Yeah, Soderbergh would have approved of that whole sequence.
I think he would have. Yeah, I think he would have gotten a kick out of it.
It's hilarious in that regard. And I do love how simultaneously, as she's walking through that corridor, you have Ben there with her on the phone, kind of walking her through there.
But it's a hearing aid
as well.
Yeah. That's their form of like digital communication that you see in all these movies. Yeah, look, it's clever. It's obvious, but it's at least clever.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's great about that dynamic as well. Speaking of Ben, like there's fun to be had with their relationship as it unfolds, but they have these honest conversations about where they are in their lives. They do a lot of reminiscing about, hey, do you remember going on this trip in 1998, which that was 25 years ago at this point. But when you're getting older, like 10, 15, 20 years, there's such a big difference between 73 and 93. Whereas 23, like I'm 39.
Yeah.
When I was in my early 20s to where I'm at now, aside from having kids, like I don't feel as if I've aged to the point where my life has changed drastically. It really hasn't. I mean, sure, you feel it a little bit when you get into your mid to late 30s. You you
start
definitely
to
start
feel
to
it,
notice
but
you're not
yeah.
22 anymore for
It's
sure.
it's a different type of fragility when it's in your 70s into your
To
90s
your
because
nine,
that is a
exactly.
huge
That's
turning
exactly what
point
I'm
there.
trying to say.
Yeah.
And this film really wants to address that specifically.
Yeah. I
And
love
again, like amidst the fragility, though,
yeah.
is this spirit that is just infectious in these
Yeah.
characters. I
I
just love
do
it.
I do too. I do love the idea here that Thelma is at least symbolically not too far off from her grandson Daniel, played by, to your point, Joaquin
Yeah.
Phoenix lookalike.
Young one.
Uh,
Yeah. Time
yeah,
traveler. Joaquin Phoenix.
like there is, despite them being 70 years apart, they're actually in similar places of lostness.
Yeah.
As if they
Yeah.
feel like that there is a lack of purpose in both of their lives. Like,
Yeah.
admittedly, I think the writing of Daniel here might be my one minor issue because I think they might flesh him out a little bit too much. I think they get maybe a little bit too literal with his backstory, like his past girlfriend and some of these things, which I don't think are necessary. I think Fred Heckinger here is good enough to sell that lostness to
I agree.
convey that parallel that even at 24 years old or whatever his age is, he's kind of at this same state of almost like mental and physical purgatory as his grandma is. And they both have to prove a certain point to find this place once again. I love that parallel. I just wish that maybe they didn't write him as detailed, if that makes sense. I think that's the one thing I wish that maybe it didn't get as distracted with. But I think the idea of someone like Thelma and how she has to reclaim that sense of purpose even in her 90s, that's something that we also do in our 20s in a different
Yeah.
way with a different physicality. It's not quite as fragile as we're talking about, but sometimes we have a similar mental and emotional goal. And I kind of like that parallel there.
I agree. There is a despondency to Daniel that is really great. And I agree. It comes through in the performance. It's not something that has to be written out or told to us. I didn't mind, I guess, those details that are ultimately revealed because the parallel is what works for me mostly.
That's
and
all
I
it
do
needs,
agree with you that there is a lostness to both characters and how they find a sense of peace in each other at the end of this film. I think is really great. Like that last conversation they have, again, while being on the nose with the film's emotion and ideas there. But that is kind of the point, though. Like what he says to her is about being in the moment and realizing that this isn't going to last forever. I don't know how much time I have, but I'm going to say this to you anyway. Why would I wait for you to pass on before I express this emotion? Like there is something about finding healing in that before the pain actually comes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do appreciate how the film goes about exhibiting that specific dynamic and how they find this arresting truth in each other.
Yeah.
It's really great. Again, not revolutionary by any means, but in this film, it works. It's just incredibly radiant. I loved it. Yeah.
It works. Even the parental dynamics played by Clark Gregg and Parker Posey, they're not really characters here. They're more like ciphers for jokes and commentary. I think they're at least effective here. I mean, really, the players here are June Squibb, Fred Heckinger, and and Richard Roundtree, which we should also acknowledge this was sadly Richard Roundtree's last role before his passing in October of 2023.
Yeah.
And I'm glad he at least, went out on a high note here, I guess, because this is a very great performance from him as well. I guess he's most known for playing John Shaft in the original Shaft film. But I remember seeing him even in movies like George of the Jungle growing up as a kid. And I think he's very magnetic in even some of those smaller inconsequential roles and even consequential films that I have to give him credit for. But yeah, it's a very charming film that acknowledges the how getting old is not a bad thing, that there is still something you can reclaim, which is then counteracted by, Malcolm McDowell's in this movie. He's in the opening credits, so it's not a spoiler to say that he's in this movie, but he doesn't show up physically until the final act. And the way he's visualized here and how he goes about reclaiming similar things, but in different ways. I like that. I like how perpendicular that is to the arc of Thelma and how she goes about it in her own way.
Yeah, I want to circle back to something you said about Richard Roundtree. And also, by the way, let's not forget that he was Uncle John Shaft in the 2000 Shaft as well.
Let's not forget that too. Yeah. It's important. It's important.
Yeah, even if you don't recognize the name, you've probably seen this guy in small roles because he's been in quite a bit of stuff.
For sure.
But it is interesting how meta his character kind of is here, given the fact that he did pass away last October, because he wants to express to Thelma a sense of urgency, I guess. Yeah. There's a free spirit to Thelma that, again, you just can't help but love. It's extremely charming.
Yeah.
But in this film, Ben is trying to articulate and emphasize to her, hey, I know you think that you're 24, but you're not.
Exactly.
And we're getting older, and he wants to kind of ground Thelma a little bit, and what he talks about as far as aging and this sense of lostness that he's experienced. But again, like maintaining that friendship. Like Ben in this film is just one of the most cordial,
he's a sweetheart.
incredible people. Like he's so endearing in this film, and seeing him grapple with his aging, the character that is, knowing that the actor had already passed away, and one can assume had grappled with that in these last few years in his real life. It certainly adds a little bit more heft to the character from that perspective. But
for sure, I agree.
And I will echo you about Malcolm, Parker Posey and Clark Gregg as the comedic ciphers of this film. They didn't do too much for me, but as far as the comedy goes, I think they're perfectly fine, adequate.
Yeah. They work, they function, roles. They're good at their jobs. Yeah. They're good at their jobs. Yeah, absolutely.
Very endearing film. I quite enjoyed it a lot. And I just want to echo June Squibb again. She's so good. For the fact that it took 93 years for her to get a leading role is ridiculous. But I love her. I don't know if there's any sort of realistic possibility to this, but I really want her to be on the campaign trail this fall.
I would love it. So there's a great narrative there, and it's a great performance. I think that's worthy of that kind of conversation. I agree. It's not just a legacy award in this case.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's worthy. I think this would be a great opportunity. It's probably it'll be the only opportunity for her to get lead actress.
Yeah, there's a moment in the third act where I mentioned Malcolm McDowell's in this movie, and again, I love the juxtaposition there that he's struggling as an old man as well, but goes about it in the wrong ways.
Yes.
There's a moment between the two of them in this final confrontation that I don't want to give it away, but if I saw this in a theater, it's almost as like applaudable as something like the biggest Marvel moment you're going to see that weekend.
Yeah. Are you talking about the computer, what she does on the computer?
Yeah. Well, there's a moment before she even does anything on the computer where she reveals something that it tricked me. Like I was taken aback by it. I'll simply say that. And it just goes to show how quick-witted and intelligent that she was in the moment.
Yeah.
It's kind of a stand up and cheer kind of moment in a movie that I didn't expect that to be in a movie like this. I really didn't. Yeah. I thought that was great.
It's that this is probably spoilers, but I'm gonna dance around it still. But it's that meme. Have you ever seen the meme of you need to call the cops, and then the next photo underneath is, but not for me, and he's like pointing a gun at the person.
Yeah. That's it. But when that moment happened,
that's exactly what happened.
I was like, oh yeah.
I love it. No, it's
that was great. It was great.
It's so good.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's all I have. June Squibb is awesome.
I do want to ask you,
a lot of fun.
We talked about Mission Impossible being referenced a lot in this movie. Did you catch the line of dialogue that was a direct riff from that movie at the end of this one?
At the end of the film?
Yeah. There's an exchange between Daniel and Thelma, where he asks her, "Did you get it?" And she went, "I got it."
Oh,
Which they've said twice in the Mission Impossible franchise already.
yeah. Yeah. Okay.
When I heard that, I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, okay. That's cute. That's
There
cute."
you go. Yeah. We got to send June Squibb to the Oscars. That's it. That's
get
my
her there.
last final thought.
get her
Send her
there.
to the Oscars. She deserves it.
She should host the Oscars.
Yeah. Ask Thelma. I think that with Thelma rather.
Yeah. Have the two of them do it. I'd love to see that.
Exactly. Okay, well, if you agree or disagree with any of our thoughts, and again, be careful with that, you can reach out to us. You can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can email us insessionfilm@gmail.com or reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd as well. Yeah, I think that's it. As we get out of here, just a reminder that we have a review for Deadpool and Wolverine up as well. And the main show this week, we had a guest on the show. The great Jay Ledbetter joined us. We had a fun surprise segment for him that you definitely need to go and check out. We, of course, talked about all the Marvel shenanigans from Comic-Con.
That was exhausting.
Very. So, it was a full show.
Yeah.
Definitely go and check all of that out. There is a Women in Session episode up this week as well, and Chasing Gold. It's a full week. So be sure to check all of that out. Brendan, do you have any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Go see Thelma. And if you don't like the film, talk to JD. I want to see that confrontation come back.
Yeah, I might have to. I don't get confrontational, but I
wanna
will
see-
fight for June Squibb. Okay?
I want to see you get out of your box. Get out of that penalty box and actually fight for June.
I'm going to. Yeah, I'm going to fight for June. I will absolutely fight for June. And time traveler Joaquin Phoenix. I will fight for the both of them.
You took me by surprise with that. I did not know you were going in that direction with Fred Hampton in this one.
You're welcome. So I figured that would be a little bit of a curve.
Oh, glad we started with that to get that out of the way.
Exactly. Yeah, I didn't want the review to get bogged down by that.
Oh, yeah, it would have. Smart.
At any rate, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time on the In Session Film Podcast. June Squibb.
Oh,
Let's get her to the Oscars, baby.
I love June.
Do it.
Great month.